Good morning, everybody. When we think of George Washington, we think of him as the father of our country and the successful general during the Revolution. But he was, before the Revolution, a loyal British subject, and during the French and Indian War of the 1750s, wore a red coat and was an officer in the British Army. As the 1700s began, North America was occupied by the Spanish, the French, and the English. And the English and the French were in close contact along the eastern seaboard, and there were many Indian tribes who lived in the same area. So one of the issues of the French and Indian War is, with whom will the Indians side? There had been 3 wars between the British and the French in the 1600s into the 1700s, named after the kings and queens of England at the time. And in Western Mass, if you go to Deerfield, you can see this sign that reminds us that some of the fighting happened in Massachusetts between Indians and the English settlers. So around 1750, the French and the English are uneasy neighbors, especially along the spine of the Appalachians and up into the maritime provinces of Canada. An area that was really under dispute was the Ohio River Valley because of the importance of the Ohio River. Now, back in the early days of the colony, the Virginians had claimed land all the way to the Mississippi. And by the time we get to our story, one of the big questions was who owned what in that area of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Virginia. And the French and the British had forts there. And again, they were in uneasy relationship. Well, the French and Indian War began in 1754 when there was a little battle south of Pittsburgh. The British won, and they were led by this guy, 22-year-old George Washington. A couple months later, though, Washington lost in a different battle, and he actually disappears from the scene for a while. Now, at the same time, in 1754, Benjamin Franklin suggested that the colonials meet in Albany to talk about working together as they resisted the French and their Indian allies. Now, this is not a call for independence, but it is a call for more unity, and this is the famous cartoon that Ben Franklin drew, the Join or Die cartoon. Well, the low point for the British Army came in 1757 when they were defeated by the French at Fort William Henry on Lake George in New York State. People were killed and there was a massacre, and this is the background to the book and later the movie, The Last of the Mohicans. Things start to turn around for England, though, when William Pitt becomes the prime minister. And Pitt worked hard to enlist more American colonial help, also worked with the Indians, and the British changed their strategy and over time put a lot of pressure along the waterways, the Great Lakes, the St. Lawrence River, along the Atlantic coast. And this really hurt the French war effort because it put pressure on their supplies, which came in by water. Now, our event is on this date, November 25 in 1758. The British retook a fort at the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers. It was called Fort Duquesne. Washington was involved in this, and it was changed later to Fort Pitt and then ultimately Pittsburgh after William Pitt. The most famous battle, though, is probably the battle at Quebec, where the British Army scaled the cliffs at night. The next day fought the French army on the Plains of Abraham. And this was really the end of the war for the French. Now, when the war is finished, the British start levying taxes on the American colonists. And here's some of the ones you might remember. But this was all to help pay for the war. We resisted this, though, because we didn't think they had the power to tax us from Parliament. So here's Lexington, 1775, the beginning of the Revolution. Many of the soldiers for our side had probably fought for the British during the French and Indian War, including Washington, who was at one point a redcoat.